Elena Rodriguez set down the crystal water pitcher and stepped back from the private dining table, her movements practiced and invisible. After 4 years at the Sterling House, she had mastered the art of being present without being noticed. The restaurant catered to Chicago's elite, where deals worth millions were negotiated over perfectly seared steaks and aged wine. Tonight's guest in the private room was Victor Blackwood, whose name appeared regularly in the business section of every newspaper. At 48, he had built Blackwood Enterprises into one of the most respected development firms in the Midwest. His silver-streaked hair and tailored navy suit spoke of success, but his eyes held the sharpness of someone who had fought for every achievement. 3 other men sat with him. His attorney, a nervous man named Philip Grant, who kept adjusting his tie. 2 representatives from Meridian Capital, both young and aggressive, with the polished confidence of Ivy League graduates. The table was covered with documents, thick contracts bound with blue backing, site plans, and financial projections. Elena refilled water glasses, her presence barely acknowledged. She had learned long ago that wealthy clients preferred their servers to be functionaries, seen but not heard. It gave her an unusual advantage. She heard everything: the Harborview project, a massive waterfront development that would reshape the entire lakefront district, residential towers, commercial spaces, and a public marina. The investment required was staggering, nearly $2 billion. Victor had spent 3 years planning it, assembling the land parcels, securing permits, and negotiating financing. Philip Grant was speaking, his voice strained. The City Council has approved all zoning changes. Environmental assessments are complete. We have construction permits ready to file the moment we close. One of the Meridian representatives, a man named Derek Chen, smiled confidently. Our due diligence team has been extremely thorough, Mr. Blackwood. This is a clean transaction. We close in 90 days, and construction begins immediately. Victor said nothing. He stared at the contract in front of him, his jaw tight. Elena recognized that expression. She had seen it on her father's face when doctors delivered difficult news. It was the look of someone whose instincts were screaming warnings they could not articulate. Elena approached to clear dessert plates. As she reached across the table, her eyes fell on one of the site assessment documents. It was dense with technical language and survey notations. But something caught her attention. A small notation in faded blue ink along the bottom margin. Environmental Covenant, EC 1952. Followed by a reference number. Her breath caught. That notation format was familiar. Painfully familiar. 5 years ago, Elena had been 6 months from completing her degree in environmental law. She had been fascinated by the intersection of development and conservation, the complex regulations that govern how land could be used. Her professor, Dr. Marian Ashford, had been obsessive about historical environmental restrictions. She had drilled into her students the importance of examining original documents, not just digital databases. Environmental covenants from the 1950s, Dr. Ashford had explained, were different from modern restrictions. They were private agreements between original property owners and conservation groups, often created to preserve wetlands or protect wildlife corridors. They could remain legally binding for decades, sometimes in perpetuity, and they were notoriously easy to miss because they were not always filed with current county records. The notation Elena was looking at matched exactly what Dr. Ashford had taught them to watch for. EC 1952. The EC designation stood for Environmental Covenant. The 1952 date meant it predated modern environmental protection laws by nearly 2 decades. Elena straightened up, the plate trembling slightly in her hand. Her heart pounded. This could not be real. Victor Blackwood had the best legal team money could buy. They would have conducted exhaustive title searches, hired environmental specialists to review every regulation and restriction, but she knew what she was looking at. That notation was a red flag. She glanced at the men. They were focused on financing terms, discussing interest rates and payment schedules. Nobody was looking at the site assessment. Nobody had seen what she had seen. Elena backed away from the table, her mind racing. She could walk away, finish her shift, go home to her small apartment where her father waited, recovering from his latest round of chemotherapy. Tomorrow, she would wake up and serve breakfast to different wealthy strangers. In 90 days, Victor Blackwood would close his deal, and whatever happened next would not be her concern. But Dr. Ashford's voice echoed in her mind. These restrictions exist for important reasons. Ignoring them does not make them disappear. It just makes the consequences more severe. Elena looked at Victor Blackwood. Despite his wealth and power, he looked exhausted. The stress lines around his eyes were deep. He was about to make a decision that could destroy everything he had built, and he had no idea. She made her choice. Elena set down the plate, smoothed her black uniform, and walked back to the table. Her legs felt unsteady, but she kept moving. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackwood," she said quietly. All four men looked up, their expressions ranging from surprise to irritation. Philip Grant frowned. "We are in the middle of something important." But Victor Blackwood held up a hand, silencing his attorney. His sharp eyes studied Elena with sudden interest. "Yes, what is it?" Elena took a breath. "Sir, I apologize for interrupting, but I noticed something on the site assessment document. There is a notation that references an environmental covenant from 1952. It might be important." The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Derek Chen stared at her as if she had started speaking another language. Philip Grant's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Victor Blackwood leaned forward, his entire focus shifting to Elena. "Show me," he said. Victor Blackwood stood from his chair, his imposing frame commanding immediate attention. He gestured toward the site assessment document with one hand, while keeping his eyes fixed on Elena. "Show me exactly what you are talking about." Elena stepped closer, her pulse racing. She pointed to the faded notation at the bottom of the document, her finger hovering just above the text. "Right here, sir. This reference code, EC1952, with this file number." The EC designation typically indicates an environmental covenant from the post-war era. These were private agreements that restricted how waterfront property could be developed, often to preserve wetland ecosystems or wildlife habitats. They can still be legally enforceable today. Philip Grant pushed his glasses up and leaned over to examine the notation. His expression shifted from skepticism to barely concealed panic. "This is impossible. Our environmental consulting firm conducted a complete historical review going back 75 years. There are no active environmental restrictions on this property. The environmental impact statement is clean." Derek Chen from Meridian Capital out a dismissive laugh. "Mr. Blackwood, I think your server has been watching too many legal documentaries. Our environmental assessment team includes former EPA officials. If there was any issue, we would have discovered it months ago." But Victor Blackwood ignored them both. He picked up the site assessment and held it closer to the light, squinting at the tiny notation. His expression had transformed from weary resignation to laser-focused intensity. "Where did you learn about environmental covenants?" Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was studying environmental law before I had to leave university. My professor specialized in historical land use restrictions because they cause so many problems for modern developers who overlook them. She was particularly focused on waterfront properties because the covenants from that era were designed to protect spawning grounds and wetland ecosystems." Victor set the document down carefully and turned to his attorney. "Philip, when was the last time someone physically examined the original paper records at the county environmental office from the 1950s? Philip Grant shifted uncomfortably. "Victor, everything has been digitized. The environmental firm uses the most comprehensive database systems available. They cross-reference federal, state, and county records." "That is not what I asked," Victor said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "When did someone physically examine the original documents from that era?" The attorney hesitated. "We relied on the digital archives and the environmental impact statement prepared by the consulting firm. The original paper records from that period are stored in an off-site archive facility. They are rarely accessed because the county transferred everything to their electronic system." Victor closed his eyes briefly. Elena could see the calculations happening behind his expression. When he opened them again, he looked directly at her. What would this type of covenant typically restrict? Elena swallowed hard. Environmental covenants from the 1950s typically prohibited any construction that would disrupt natural wetland drainage patterns, destroy fish spawning areas, or alter shoreline configurations. Some required maintaining specific buffer zones from the water's edge. Others prohibited building above certain heights to preserve migratory bird corridors. Without seeing the actual covenant document, I cannot tell you what this specific one requires. But if it exists and applies to your property, violating it could result in federal court injunctions, mandatory restoration orders, or even criminal penalties under environmental protection statutes. Victor Blackwood made a decision in that moment that changed everything. He pulled out his phone and dialed, his fingers moving with swift precision. As it rang, he spoke to the table. "This meeting is suspended until I get definitive answers." Derek Chen stood abruptly, his polished confidence fracturing. "Mr. Blackwood, we have a binding letter of intent. We close in 90 days. You cannot halt this process based on speculation from a restaurant server." Victor held up one finger, silencing him as someone answered. "Catherine, this is Victor Blackwood. I need you to do something for me immediately, tonight. I need you to go to the Cook County Environmental Archive and pull the original covenant records for the Harborview waterfront parcels, specifically lots 223 through 229. Start with any documents filed between 1950 and 1955. Look for environmental restriction covenants. Yes, I know what time it is. I will compensate you generously." He ended the call and turned to Elena. "What is your name?" "Elena Rodriguez, sir. Elena Rodriguez. You are not serving tables for the rest of this evening. You are sitting at this table until we determine whether you just saved me from disaster or wasted my time. Either way, I need you here." Elena glanced toward the main dining room, where her manager stood watching with obvious alarm. Victor followed her gaze and called out, "Whatever her name is, she is with me now. Send someone else to handle this room." The next 3 hours felt surreal. Elena sat in the leather chair surrounded by men in expensive suits while Victor Blackwood orchestrated what could only be described as a legal emergency response. Philip Grant made frantic calls to the environmental consulting firm, demanding explanations about their search methodology. The Meridian Capital representatives alternated between angry protests and hushed conversations with their home office. Victor himself remained eerily calm, asking Elena detailed questions about her studies, about what she remembered from her environmental law courses, about Dr. Ashford, who had taught her to watch for these historical restrictions. He wanted to understand not just what she knew, but how she thought. At 11:43 at night, Victor's phone rang. He answered immediately, putting it on speaker. "Catherine, what did you find?" The voice on the other end was breathless with urgency and fatigue. "Mr. Blackwood, you need to hear this. I found it. There is an environmental covenant filed in August 1952 by the original property owners, the Harborview Conservation Trust. It was never digitized because it was filed as a supplementary document to a separate land transfer, so it did not appear in standard title or environmental searches. What does it restrict?" Victor asked, his voice deadly calm. "The covenant prohibits any construction within 200 feet of the natural shoreline that would alter tidal flow patterns or destroy wetland vegetation. It also requires maintaining the existing creek tributary system that runs through the property. The covenant was established to protect fish spawning grounds and runs with the land in perpetuity unless dissolved by federal environmental review and approval." The silence in the private dining room was suffocating. The Harborview project was designed with residential towers built right up to the water's edge, maximizing lake views and property values. The entire financial model depended on that configuration. A 200-foot setback requirement did not just modify the project, it completely invalidated the architectural plans and reduced the buildable area by nearly 40%. Philip Grant looked like he might faint. How did the environmental firm miss this? Catherine's voice crackled through the speaker. The covenant was filed under a property description system that predates modern GIS mapping. When the county digitized their environmental records in the 1990s, this document was categorized under wetland preservation rather than property restrictions. It exists in the system, but you would only find it if you specifically searched for historical wetland covenants or if you physically examined the original paper files. Victor leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. "Thank you, Catherine. Send me high-resolution scans of every page. I want the complete document in my email within 30 minutes. He ended the call and looked around the table. His gaze settled on Derek Chen. "You knew." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Derek Chen's practiced smile disappeared. "I have no idea what you are implying." Victor stood, his full height, making him an intimidating presence. "Your environmental assessment team includes former EPA officials," you said. "People who would know exactly where to look for documents that were misfiled during digitization. People who would understand how to find a restriction that no standard environmental review would reveal. You are making baseless accusations," Chen said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Victor continued, his voice cold and methodical. "You found this covenant months ago during your due diligence. You knew it would kill the project as designed. But instead of disclosing it, you buried it. You allowed me to proceed with planning, with finalizing city approvals, with spending $40 million on architectural designs and engineering studies. You waited until I was fully committed, until I had signed your letter of intent and was locked into your financing terms." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "Then after closing, you would have anonymously tipped off environmental groups about the violation. They would file for an injunction. Construction would halt immediately. I would be in breach of contracts with the city, facing hundreds of millions in losses and potential criminal environmental violations. And your firm would be positioned as the solution, ready to restructure everything on terms that would give you controlling interest in my entire company." Derek Chen grabbed his briefcase and stood. "This is slander, Mr. Blackwood. You have no proof of any such scheme." Victor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I do not need proof for criminal charges. I just need enough evidence to tie you up in civil litigation and regulatory investigations for the next decade. By the time we finish deposing every member of your due diligence team and your compliance department, your firm's reputation will be destroyed. No developer will ever trust Meridian Capital again." The Meridian representatives gathered their materials and headed for the door, their retreat, barely maintaining professional dignity. Chen paused at the entrance. "You cannot prove anything." "I do not have to," Victor replied. "You just walked away from a $2 billion deal at midnight because a restaurant server pointed out a detail you claimed did not exist. That tells me everything I need to know." After they left, Philip Grant sat with his head in his hands. "Victor, I failed you completely. My firm should have caught this. I will submit my resignation in the morning." Victor waved a dismissive hand. "You relied on systems that were supposed to work. The failure was institutional, not personal. But we are changing environmental consultants immediately, and I want a full audit of every active project we have. Original documents examined, not just database searches." He turned to Elena, who had been sitting in stunned silence through the entire confrontation. "As for you, Miss Rodriguez, you just saved me from walking into a trap that would have destroyed everything I have built over 25 years. The losses would have been catastrophic. My company, my investors, my reputation, everything would have collapsed." Elena found her voice. "I just remembered something from a class, Mr. Blackwood. I did not do anything extraordinary. You did something my entire legal and environmental team failed to do. You paid attention. You trusted your knowledge even when surrounded by supposed experts. That requires courage." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, placing it on the table in front of her. "Be at my office tomorrow morning at 9. We need to discuss your future, because serving tables is not where your talents belong." Elena picked up the card with trembling fingers. "Victor Blackwood, Chief Executive Officer, Blackwood Enterprises." The address was in one of the most prestigious towers in Chicago's financial district. "Sir, I am not sure I understand what you mean." Victor's expression softened slightly. Get some rest, Elena. Tomorrow, everything changes. As Elena walked out of the Sterling house at 1 in the morning, the cool night air shocked her back to reality. She looked down at the business card in her hand, then up at the illuminated Chicago skyline. Somewhere in that forest of glass and steel was her future, whatever that might be. For the first time and for years, the weight of abandoned dreams felt a little lighter. Elena Rodriguez stood outside the glass and steel tower that housed Blackwood Enterprises, watching her reflection in the polished facade. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the previous night in endless loops. The business card felt heavy in her purse, a small rectangle that somehow carried the weight of possibility. She wore the only professional outfit she owned, a charcoal blazer and black pants she had purchased years ago for university presentations. Her shoes were simple flats, practical, but worn. As she stepped through the revolving doors into the marble lobby, she felt acutely aware of the difference between herself and the polished professionals striding past with their leather portfolios and confident expressions. The security desk directed her to the 37th floor. The elevator ride felt like ascending into another dimension. When the doors opened, she entered a reception area that resembled a modern art museum more than an office. Original artwork adorned the walls, and the furniture was a carefully curated blend of contemporary design and classic sophistication. A woman in her 50s with elegant gray hair and a warm smile approached. "You must be Elena Rodriguez. I am Margaret Chen, Mr. Blackwood's executive assistant. He is expecting you. Please follow me." They walked through a corridor lined with photographs of buildings, each one a testament to Victor Blackwood's career. Elena recognized several Chicago landmarks, structures that had become part of the city's architectural identity. Margaret stopped at a set of double doors and knocked gently before opening them. Victor Blackwood stood by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, coffee in hand. He turned as they entered, and Elena was struck by how different he looked in morning light. The exhaustion from the previous night had been replaced by focused energy that seemed to fill the entire space. "Elena, thank you for coming. Please, sit down." He gestured to a pair of leather chairs near his desk. "Margaret, could you bring us coffee?" As Margaret left, Victor settled into the chair across from Elena. His expression was serious but approachable. "I want to tell you what happened after you left last night." Victor leaned forward, his hands clasped. "I spent the rest of the night with a different legal team, one I keep for situations requiring aggressive strategy. We analyzed the environmental covenant you helped us discover. The document is ironclad. Any construction that violates the shoreline setback or disrupts the creek system would trigger immediate federal intervention." Elena listened, her heart pounding. "So the project cannot proceed?" Victor smiled, a calculating expression that reminded her why he had become so successful. "The project as originally designed cannot proceed. But that does not mean we are defeated. It means we adapt." He stood and walked to a large display board, pulling back a cover to reveal new architectural renderings. "These are preliminary designs for a revised Harborview development. We respect the 200-foot setback and preserve the creek tributary. The buildings are positioned further inland, with green corridors connecting to the waterfront. It is actually more environmentally progressive, which will attract a different market segment. The profit margin is lower, but the project remains viable." "What about the financing?" Elena asked. "You walked away from Meridian Capital." Victor's smile widened. "That is where things became interesting. After confirming the covenant was real, and that Meridian almost certainly knew about it, I made calls to others in the industry. Turns out, I am not the first developer they have tried to trap. There are at least 4 other cases in the past 3 years where developers discovered hidden issues just before closing Meridian deals. Nobody could prove fraud, but the pattern is unmistakable." He returned to his chair. "So this morning, I did 2 things. First, I contacted the Securities and Exchange Commission with information about Meridian's due diligence practices. By next week, there will be federal investigators asking very uncomfortable questions. Second, I reached out to Cascade Financial, one of Meridian's primary competitors. They were extremely interested in financing a revised Harborview project, especially when I explained they would be taking a deal away from their biggest rival. Elena felt admiration for the strategic thinking. You turned a disaster into an advantage. I turned a disaster into a learning opportunity, Victor corrected. And I did it because you gave me advance warning. If I had closed that deal and discovered the covenant afterward, I would be fighting for my company's survival right now. Instead, I am negotiating from strength. Margaret returned with coffee, and for a moment, they sat in comfortable silence. Elena sipped the perfectly brewed coffee and tried to calm her racing thoughts. She still had no idea why she was really here. As if reading her mind, Victor set down his cup and looked at her directly. Elena, I asked you here because I want to offer you a position with my company. Elena nearly choked on her coffee. Sir, I appreciate the gesture, but I am not qualified. I did not finish my degree. I have been serving tables for 4 years. Your company needs experienced professionals, not someone who got lucky spotting something on a document. Victor held up a hand. Let me tell you what I saw last night. I saw someone who recognized a problem that an entire team of expensive consultants missed. I saw someone who had the courage to speak up in a room full of people who could have dismissed her. I saw someone who trusted her knowledge even when logic suggested she should stay quiet. Those qualities are rare, Elena. They are more valuable than any credential. He pulled a folder from his desk and slid it across to her. I am offering you a position as a compliance analyst in our environmental review department. Your job will be to examine property documents and environmental assessments before we commit resources to projects. You will work under Jennifer Moss, our Director of Environmental Compliance. She is demanding but fair, and she has already agreed to mentor you. Elena opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a formal offer letter. The salary listed made her breath catch. It was nearly 3 times what she earned at the restaurant, enough to cover her father's medical expenses and still have money remaining. But there is more, Victor continued. Part of your compensation includes educational assistance. If you want to complete your environmental law degree or pursue additional certifications, the company will pay for it. All I ask is that you commit to working hard and continuing to trust your instincts. Elena felt tears threatening. She blinked them back, trying to maintain composure. Mr. Blackwood, I do not know what to say. This is beyond anything I imagined. Say yes. Victor replied simply. Then prepare to work harder than you ever have. Because I did not offer you this position out of charity. I offered it because I need people like you. This industry is filled with professionals who follow established processes without questioning them. That approach nearly cost me everything. I need people who see what others miss. He stood and walked back to the windows, his silhouette framed against the Chicago skyline. You know what separates successful people from everyone else? It is not intelligence or connections or even luck. It is the willingness to act when opportunity presents itself. You had every reason to stay silent last night. You could have finished your shift and let me walk into that trap. But you spoke up. That tells me everything about your character. Elena rose from her chair, clutching the offer letter. There was one question she needed to ask. Why are you really doing this? You could hire anyone with better credentials. Victor turned to face her, his expression softening. Because 15 years ago, I was a project manager working for someone else, building developments from other people's visions. I had ideas about sustainable design, about creating spaces that served communities, but nobody would listen. Then one day, I noticed a structural flaw in a high-rise project. I told my supervisor, who told the developer. They fixed the problem, and that developer gave me a chance. He saw something in me that I barely saw in myself. He walked back to his desk and extended his hand. I am not repaying a debt, Elena. I am investing in talent that would otherwise be wasted. So the question is not why I am offering you this position. The question is whether you are brave enough to accept it. Elena looked at the outstretched hand, then at the offer letter in her trembling fingers. Her mind raced through implications. This was not just employment. It was a complete transformation of her life's direction. She thought about her father, about the medical bills that had forced her to abandon her education. She thought about her mother, who worked long hours and still struggled. She thought about Professor Meridian Ashford, who had once told her she had a gift for seeing patterns others overlooked. Most of all, she thought about the woman she had been for years ago, full of ambition and hope, and the woman she had become, serving tables while her dreams gathered dust. This moment was a bridge between those two versions of herself. She took Victor Blackwood's hand and shook it firmly. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood, I accept." His smile was genuine and warm. "Excellent. You start Monday. That gives you a few days to give notice at the restaurant and prepare. Margaret will handle all paperwork and get you set up with building access and technology. Jennifer Moss will meet with you on your first day, outline your responsibilities. As Elena turned to leave, Victor called out once more. "And Elena, thank you. You saved more than a business deal last night. You reminded me why I got into this industry in the first place. To build things that matter with people who care about doing things correctly." 6 months later, afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of the Blackwood Enterprises conference room. Elena sat at the large table surrounded by environmental impact assessments and her laptop displaying multiple regulatory databases. She had just finished reviewing preliminary compliance documents for a new acquisition in the South Loop and was preparing her report for Jennifer Moss. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Your father's oncologist says the treatment is working better than expected. We might be able to reduce his chemotherapy schedule soon. Thank you for everything, sweetheart." Elena smiled and typed a quick response before returning to the documents in front of her. She had found something interesting in the historical land use records, a pattern of industrial activity that suggested possible soil contamination. It would require additional investigation, but her instincts told her it was worth pursuing. Jennifer Moss appeared in the doorway. "How is the South Loop project looking?" "There might be a contamination issue," Elena replied without looking up from her notes. "I want to verify something with the EPA regional office before I finalize my assessment." Jennifer smiled. "That is exactly the kind of thoroughness we need. Take your time and do it properly." After Jennifer left, Elena leaned back in her chair and looked out at the city skyline. 6 months ago, she had been wiping down tables, her dreams feeling impossibly distant. Now, she sat in one of Chicago's most respected development companies, doing work that mattered with people who valued her contributions. She thought about Victor Blackwood's words, "The willingness to act when opportunity presents itself." She had spoken up when it would have been easier to stay silent. She had trusted her knowledge when doubt would have been safer. That single decision had changed everything. Her desk phone rang. Natalie Hayes, Environmental Compliance. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar. "Miss Rodriguez, this is Thomas Brennan from Meridian Capital. I was hoping we could discuss your career trajectory and potential opportunities with our firm." Elena felt cold satisfaction wash over her. Word had spread in the industry about the analyst who had spotted the flaw that experts missed. Now, the very company that had tried to trap Victor Blackwood was trying to recruit her. "Thank you for your interest, Mr. Brennan," she said politely, "but I am very happy where I am. I wish you success with your future endeavors." She hung up and returned to her documents. There was work to do, details to verify, patterns to uncover, and for the first time in years, Elena Rodriguez felt exactly where she belonged. Outside the window, the sun began to set over Chicago, casting long shadows across the buildings that Victor Blackwood had created and the future that Elena Rodriguez was helping to build, one careful analysis at a time.